Thank you so much for joining us on It's Time today. We are your hosts. I'm Linsly Donnelly, your citizen scientist and your longevity expert for midlife women.
And I'm Dr. Jen Wagner, physician and holistic performance expert. Welcome to It's Time, powered by Prosper.
Hey everybody, welcome back to It's Time. Linsly and I are so grateful that you're all are joining us today. And please remember to check out our new community, Prosper Together, where we go really deep into a lot of the areas that we talk about. We bring a lot of the science forward and have some great discussions over there. And it's a wonderful community for everyone to connect, to share, and to learn. So we look forward to having you join us over there at Prosper Together. Today, we are going to address a topic that is not really super fun to talk about. We're just going to throw that out there.
It's not fun. It's not fun. It's important. And it's something that it falls in the category of Jen and I, things we wish we knew. Our reason for recording this is for you to just know that this episode is there and save it for when it's relevant to your path. But this is our things we wish we knew. And if we had known, it would make it easier. And so we share it with you in hopes that when it's your time to navigate this, it'll make it easier for you.
So today we're diving into all about caring for aging parents and aging family members. And some tactical steps that we can take to try to help smooth this process and some things we can do to prepare for this phase of life. But then also equally as important, self-care and community for those in the caretaking role through this process. Because as Linsly just so eloquently put before we started recording today, is this is a marathon and this is a new phase of life. This is often not a short-term illness, Band-Aid, move on kind of situation.
Yes. So as Jen and I were going through it, we thought it's kind of like 8 lessons learned. And that helps us think through the morass of stuff and boil it down into kind of the top 8 lessons learned, things we'd wish we'd known before each of us ran into the inevitable, which, it's a gift to run into it, right? If we run into this stage of life, it means that our parents have lived a long time and that we're living a long time and we're engaged with them. So the starting point is this is a gift of a phase. It's one of life's seasons, but Dr. Jen and I have both have navigated and are navigating challenges with parents right now. And so the number one thing that we wish we'd known, and we thought we did, and probably most folks think they do, but we would just reiterate it and detail it a little bit, is to try to get things in order before it's time to deal with this challenge. And so by get things in order, we had a couple of ideas around, of course, basic, what are people's care wishes? What are your parents' basic financial and legal wishes? But also, some of the nuanced things like, what's your level of comfort? What are your current pharmaceuticals? Things that you just will need when you walk into this emergency situation, and you want to make sure you order them in advance.
I think so. To kind of bring this home and bring this full circle, I lost my mom a little over a year ago now, and having taken the time to have some conversations with her, with my dad, with my brother. I guess not luckily, but that's our nuclear family. And to have taken the time to have the conversations with both of my parents to say, what do you guys want? And what do you want if something happens to mom? Dad, what do you want? Mom, what do you want if something happens to dad? Like, what are you thinking? And my parents' end of life was very different than what was expected. If you would have gone back 20 years, their order of passing, and my dad thankfully is still alive and doing really well, no one would have thought that. No one would have thought that my dad would outlive my mom. And so we had never really planned for that cycle and that series of events to have happened. And so we were fortunate too, when she started to decline, to have the time to have those conversations. And so when you're in a more emotionally charged, urgent setting, you're not trying to have these conversations for the first time, because that's really challenging.
Yeah. Yeah. So the preferences that your parents have, knowing what their medicines are and their core doctors, having that in a quick place. My brother is a master of the ChatGPT, scan things on an iPad and create that database. So fortunately, we had done that before we ran into this challenge with my mom right now. But also knowing kind of where to find what we needed to find for her utilities and for her financial requirements to keep her kind of current. All of that is in that
Hmm.
get stuff in order before it really matters, number one. And then number two would be kind of have a clear communication protocol and communication chain of command, so to speak. In our situation, my mom is in a wonderful dynamic with a great community and a retirement community, but there just wasn't clarity on how they were going to reach out to the family, which was a surprise because, of course, we'd filled out all that paperwork when we checked her into the retirement community. But reiterating that and making sure it's clear how you as family members are going to get information and share information is another one that can kind of take you by surprise if you haven't thought it through before you start.
Absolutely. And I think with that, making sure all of those family members are kind of on the same page, that and everybody has access to those documents can be really, really important. So even though there is usually a point person designated for communication, you know, we our lives go on as well. And so just making sure that everybody's on the same page of where things live and how that communication needs to flow.
Yeah. I think this third one is, not everybody has a Dr. Jen in their hip pocket like I do. So I kind of had the advantage, but it's this idea that whatever happens, whatever the dynamic is that is impacting your parents at this phase of life, it could be a fall. It could be, in this case, my mom had really acute pneumonia and was on a ventilator. It could be a heart event. It could be cancer. There's something that's going to trigger it. But I think the thing that's unexpected is all of the tertiary related health implications that could come because of that event, not directly related to that event, but because it was a disruptive event. And so their health responds differently than if we had that same event happen in our life.
Absolutely. I think, this goes to really two big principles. As we age, we do not recover as quickly. And so that level of fragility, it can be unmasked very quickly. That the devastation of being in bed for 5 or 6 days without having proper nutrition and the amount of mobility loss and independence loss from something that, while yes, super serious, did not seem incredibly prolonged, can have incredibly prolonged consequences and ramifications. And so to be prepared for that illnesses that, cause elderly people to be in bed, not adequately nourished and not moving can really lead to some catastrophic decline in function.
Yeah, yeah. Because I think that was a huge surprise, and it still is for my mom, but also for my brother and for me. We expected with pneumonia that she would be recovering from pneumonia, so we understood that was going to happen. That she would still have a cough, and she'd still have some. She has underlying COPD, which is a breathing challenge. But what we did not expect, which is what we're looking at right now, is that she would not be able to get out of bed and walk, and that would be what we were really trying to address with her and support her in. But it actually is not that uncommon. So if your
Mhm.
parent goes into the hospital and is immobilized for 5 days, there is a be aware and how to get in front of helping them rehab. That immobility is to some degree even more important than rehabbing the pneumonia because the antibiotics will do that.
Right. And I think along with that is starting to think about, when we have these acutely challenging situations, there's often a lot of support right up front
Hmm.
that, someone is in the hospital in the ICU. There's a lot of outpouring of support. There's a lot of attention and people, and not only within the medical system, but in your own personal community, people know something very serious is going on. But as time goes on, sometimes it feels like that support really wavers. And it is often that prolonged recovery is when we as the caregiver need increased support because it is dealing with the day in, day out. And
Yeah.
maybe the life threatening situation has been resolved, but that ongoing need to return to function that can take weeks, months, may never get back to the level of function prior to the acute event. And I think that's where some of this preparation really becomes pivotal. So understanding if your parents, what type of insurance coverage they have, what benefits they have in that realm, how to access that.
Yeah.
And I know you're in the thick of this right now, but even what types of facilities are available, either local to them or if you need, what are the implications of moving them close to a family member, and just having some of those resources in your back pocket so you understand a little bit about the difference in levels of care and what is available in their community versus in communities that maybe are closer to where you live, depending on your family preferences.
Yeah. You know what? I think, Dr. Jen, you bring up a critical point, which I think was kind of our fourth brainstorm, is it's not so fun, but it's like there are financial implications, right? And so we all are navigating our own financial planning and long term thinking. But when we're talking with our parents, it is a uncomfortable conversation, but you do your parents and yourself a disservice if you don't have it. And it's to understand what their level of care and insurance truly is. So
Mhm.
in my example, my mom is a teacher, and so she had some insurance, and we thought she had secondary insurance. But what we're learning is that secondary insurance actually still doesn't cover everything, and so we need to just kind of put parameters around that. And then my husband is navigating this with his dad. His dad is VA coverage, and so there's learning. You don't want to spend a ton of time on it before you have to, but you want to spend enough that you have a sense for what are the gaps and the parameters that you might want to
Mhm.
fill in while someone is healthy, because you
Mhm.
either can't fill them in if they're not healthy, or it's cost prohibitive to fill them in if they're not healthy.
Mhm.
So it's a morbid thought, but one that you could just have a sense of humor about it and say, let's talk about these scenarios. Are they covered? If not, let's get them in now because we don't need them. So it's easier to
Right.
access.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you're right. It is not they're not fun conversations. I remember going out to dinner with my brother and my parents, and I said, guys, this is not going to be a really fun dinner, but we're going to hash a lot of this out. And even knowing like how to access bank accounts should something happen so bills can be paid, all of these things are just, it's real life, and we don't want to think about it because we hope that that's not the way things go, but this is real life and things happen really fast, and just making sure that you have a plan and access to information. And it's funny, as I did this for my parents, I even looked back, and with my husband, with Mike and I, and we went through our stuff, and I said, okay, do the people who are responsible for our kids, do they know where everything is everything up to
Yeah.
date, like is everything still the way we want it? It's kind of even a good check-in to revisit your own stuff, to
Yeah.
say, because I think at this stage in life sometimes we've done this maybe right when we had our kids, so maybe it's been 15 years since we've really looked at this, and it's
Right.
like, is that still the right arrangement for who
Right.
would take over, who would care for our children? Are these the right financial arrangements still, et cetera? Do we still have the right accounts listed, and
Yeah.
is everything up to date? So it is sometimes even a good check-in for us to say, is everything still the way we want it?
Yeah. And this is kind of a little bit of a tangent, but I'm just going to stick it in here in case we never cover this one in another episode. What was also new news to me is that when your child turns 18, you need to do that for your 18-year-old child as well, because you don't
That's
have
a good point.
medical power of attorney for your child just because they're your child once they're 18, and you can't pay their bills for them if they ran into a medical emergency just because you're their parent. And so when you're sending kids to college, you got to do it too. It's another little unfun legal thing to do you put in place. Okay, so get all your documents in order was number 1. Know how you're going to communicate with everybody who's a stakeholder, your family. Number 2, understand that the health ramifications of the event will be broader than just related directly to the event because of the nature of being in an older season of life, and so be kind of prepared for that. And then that was 3. 4 was get in front of the financial considerations, so understanding the insurance that's in place and where you might want to backfill it before you need it because you can access it then is worth spending a little time on. And number 5, kind of related to that, was getting in front of what happens next. And so what we were talking about explicitly was this idea of some sort of rehabilitation will be required for your parent. And
Mhm.
most likely that won't be covered automatically by the insurance. And so being in front of that and knowing it and starting to make your case for what you think is going to be needed in an appeal process is a really common next step that happens. So the earlier you start to make that case in partnership with the medical practitioners, the higher the probability that that appeal will go through. Right? Does that
Yeah.
sound like the recommendation? Because
Yeah,
I'm
and this
living
is
it
a
now
really
backwards. Yeah.
Yeah, and this is a really complicated situation. And, I still spend a lot of time with my medical hat on, helping healthcare systems and physicians navigate this arena of patient is now stable enough to leave the hospital, but is not in a condition that is safe to return to their previous living environment. And what are the options? Where can they go? And how long can they stay there? And Luckily, most acute hospitals have really great social work teams and case management teams that help you get to the first step. But once you're in that first step and coverage starts to lapse, or rehab says you only have 2 weeks or this many days, et cetera, then absolutely getting that appeal process started is really important. And that it's such a challenging system to navigate. And I think that we underestimate the cost of a lot of this, and I
Yes.
think we also underestimate that, at least I did when I went through this with my mom. She happened to get kind of acutely sick over a holiday. So we were trying to get her out of the hospital into a place where she would be safe, which wasn't coming home, unfortunately. They were out of town, so they were in
Yeah.
a foreign environment. They was a holiday,
Yeah.
and we were given a sheet of paper with 4 choices on it. And we just picked one, and the team was awesome. Like, I am so grateful to that team that was taking care of her in the hospital and got us into the rehab. We went to the rehab, and she was like, I can't stay here. And I'm like, I get it. And so it's just a really complicated situation. And I think that, you have a person that is very often disconnected in the insurance company, sitting in a different state behind 18 desks, that says, you're on this algorithm and you've gotten to this day, you should have made this that made this progress, and you haven't, or you have, and this is the next step. And you just feel very disconnected from the process. And unfortunately, it is this like third party that is making these decisions. It's not the people on the ground caring for your mom right now, or who was caring for my mom. It is,
Somebody rude.
somebody
Yeah.
sitting behind a desk. And so how do you advocate for your loved one? And it's
Yeah.
really challenging.
Yeah, and basically what you're trying to do is make it easy for the person who's 18 desks away to say, "Oh, yes, I grant your appeal." So, you're trying to make it easy for them to do that and not have to defend it, because their job is to say no, right?
Right.
So,
Their job is absolutely to say no.
their job is to say no. So that's what you're trying to do, is make it easy for them to say yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Kind of related to that, though, is this idea that it's obvious, however, it's worth underscoring, is that you are the advocate. Like, your parent can't be their own advocate, even if they've recovered enough to be dialoguing. They're just not in the energy of the frame of mind. So you are the advocate for your parent, which means the combination of good cop, bad cop, if you can have more than one person in the family there, so you can shift those roles, is always eye-opening to me. I don't know why, because, I think I've shared this story before, but my grandmother was the head nurse in a hospital in Corpus Christi, Texas. One of her main mantras to us was, "You can't trust the system." And she was the nurse. It's just like, you just have to get in there and always have to advocate. So you have to advocate for your parent, and that means making sure that the ambulance has been called. It took 10 times for me to make sure the ambulance actually had been called. Our people, they're trying, but they're overwhelmed, they're overworked, they are triaging, and so you have to get in people's face and not expect that it's just going to happen.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's so true. And I think it's even harder now that we often live remote to this acute situation, right?
Mhm.
I know, neither you nor I live in the same town as our parents, even in
Yeah,
the same state as our parents.
yeah,
And so a lot of times you're navigating this from afar, and trying to be the advocate without necessarily being physically present, which adds another wrinkle for sure. And so establishing clear communication and clear dialogue cannot be underestimated. And not feeling bad about calling back 10 times,
yeah, and
not
that's just
feeling
what you
bad.
do, yeah. You just be
Yeah,
rude, you
just,
just kinda rude. And it's not, the nursing team there, it's not bad intent, they're trying the best they can, they have a gazillion other things going on, the doctor team has a gazillion things going on. So it's almost expected that if you're having an issue, you're gonna have to get noisy.
mhm,
Not
yeah,
rude, just noisy, like, you just gotta keep getting the ask in there. I mean, never rude, it's human to human, but it's not gonna just automatically happen. Related to kind of the advocacy part, like, each step in that transition from home to hospital, hospital to rehab, rehab to next, you have to be there and do the document reconciliation. We had, in this example, we had 4 different times where the wrong document was connected to my mom, or half of her situation was connected. or the medicines that she was on at home didn't make it to the hospital when she was being treated. So when she got then moved into rehab, at rehab, they didn't know what her primary medicines were. So all of that is not just like magically digitally sitting in the cloud. It's not. And so you got to connect the dots.
Yeah. And I think that is a huge, I mean, I could sit here and talk about this for weeks. This is
Right,
a
right.
huge problem in our healthcare system, is that it is so fragmented and that our systems don't talk to each other. And it is the bane of most healthcare providers' existence, is the fact that, I mean, I remember when my dad was in the ER having chest pain, and they're like, there was something on his EKG, and he's had 2 heart attacks. So yes, his EKG isn't normal, but they didn't know if it was new or old because they didn't have a previous EKG.
Yeah,
So it's
yeah,
3 a.m. They can't figure out how to get the old EKG. And I finally just put on my doctor hat. I call a hospital in Arizona. I said, "This is Dr. So-and-so. I have patient so-and-so in the
yeah,
hospital." It's totally against it. Like, it's not
yeah,
legal to do, I shouldn't be
yeah.
sharing
Right,
this story,
right.
but it was like, I told the team, I was like, "Okay, they have the EKG. Can you please give them a fax number?"
Yeah,
And it's just, yes, we shouldn't have to do that work. But to your point, these systems are so stressed to the
yeah,
breaking point that there are not the resources there that should be there to be able to really do this. And so it is okay to say, "Can I just make sure those medications are right? We've had some miscommunication." Or, you know, when this happens acutely, make 15 copies of everything and have a little folder and just say, "Here are meds, here are doctors, here are everything," and just hand it to the nursing staff and they can input it in the
great.
computer,
Yeah,
because you better believe that computer system A is not going to talk to computer system B or
right,
computer system C.
right.
Why I'm all about patient privacy are, there are downsides to that it doesn't talk to each other. And so that's finally what I like. I have iPhone pictures of of
Yeah,
my parents' medications, of EKGs. I have
yeah.
everything. And so I can just be like, "Here it is, print it out." And I just make copies when something happens, and you
That's
can
a great
just
idea.
hand
Yeah,
them out.
yeah. So this is a lot of work. So that kind of brings us to our seventh point, which is self-care. Like this, our opening thought here is this is unlike when you or your child breaks their leg and you're just like, "Oh, everything's on hold. I'm going to fix this. We're going to get this broken leg taken care of and we're going to get our kiddo set up and they're going to be recovering and then we'll pick back up whatever it was we put on hold." This isn't going to get fixed that quickly. And so if you put everything on hold, you won't be able to sustain the marathon pace. So even though it feels like a medical emergency, and it is one, you still have to carve out those self-care boundaries, the sleep, the workouts, the
Mhm.
personal time. And it feels selfish and it feels like, oh, this is urgent and important, but you won't sustain the pace that you need to.
I think that is so important, because I completely underestimated the emotional toll, because your role becomes so complicated to navigate when you have a parent who is technically a competent adult, who should have autonomy and agency and control over their situation and dignity, yet you are having to almost parent them and make some really hard decisions, and yet still grapple with the loss of someone that is your parent, that did
Yeah.
raise you. And in a way, to
Mhm.
just re-echo what you said, I'm so fortunate to have that and have that relationship. But
Yeah.
I would, and I think it being in medicine, I don't know, maybe makes it easier sometimes and maybe makes it harder. I would sit there and I could medicalize it and put that brain on and say, "This is what we need to do." And I, of course, by default become the go-to person in my family, and that's fine. That's great. I don't mind playing that. But it also kind of forced me to emotionally unattach to it. And so it took me a lot longer to recover from the emotional side, because I wasn't actively going through it. When I would see my other family members crying or upset or not understanding, I felt like I had to have this like very professional mask on at all times.
Mhm.
And I remember that, like, 2 days before my mom died, just like laying in her bed with her, just crying because I was losing my
Yeah.
mom. Like, it was the last
Yeah.
time I was going to talk to her. And like being able to take off that mask. And I think if I hadn't been, I think it's unreasonable to think that you might hit your PR on your run or your lift or
Yeah,
anything
right.
through these times. But if I hadn't been out moving, if I hadn't had my friends that said, hey, we're going to go run at 6 o'clock this morning. You just need to come. We're going to, I'm going to take
I'm
you
gonna
out.
carry you
Or,
through.
my dear aunt, who I know she listens to our podcast, she's like, I'm coming to pick you up. We're going to the gym, and
Yeah.
I think that is a really important time to lean in to your circle and your community to set and to double down on those principles because it will get you through it.
Yeah, and I think that community component is, 50% of that self-care. You had the great example of you offered, "Can I look at this? Do you want me to do this for you? Your mom's in rehab." And my default is, "No, no, I got it, don't worry." But that's that's not serving anyone. You actually, A, you're a doctor, and B, you've been through it, and C, my mom could use you looking at it. So it's like you asking for the help and taking the help is part of that self-care equation.
Yeah. In a weird parallel, it's like raising your oldest kid. You haven't done it before,
Yeah.
right? And it's like you
Yeah.
learn the first time you do it, and it's like I don't want to be the one to ask questions, and maybe people are going to doubt my parenting skills, and it's like maybe people are going to doubt my elder care skills. Well, how would we know to do it when we haven't done it
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean,
before?
it's
There's no
absolutely everyone's
manual.
first rodeo. Yeah, it's first rodeo for sure on doing that,
Yeah,
yeah. So I love that component of the self-care. But I think the last one we were thinking about our 8 is, it's hard not to bring it back to the whole reason why we started this podcast, right? Is how do we make sure that we as midlife women, midlife humans are doing the things right now? I mean, it's not that you're trying to beat aging. We want to age. That means we are continuing to live. We're trying to increase the joy factor of that aging so that we're not spending as much of the time in this dynamic where our skeletal muscle is gone. We can't get up and down. We have chalky
yeah,
bones, and if we fall, they shatter. So all of this work on eat your protein, do your resistance training, get your sleep, take care of your bone density, it matters for now and especially for enjoying when we hit those decades.
absolutely. And I think again, you know, we're I always laugh at like some of the memes you see on social media and stuff that are like all of this information that's coming at midlife women, like eat your
Oh, yeah.
protein, do this, do that. And yes, it can feel totally overwhelming, but I think we, especially here at its time and through Prosper, always want to go back to like just pick a couple little things to make some changes, right?
Yes.
And the sooner we start, the more impactful those changes are long term. So
Yes.
it's picking up a heavier set of weights at the workout you're already doing. It is adding an extra 2 tablespoons of Greek yogurt to the yogurt you're already eating,
Yeah.
or, so again, it is so important. And what I think has been super interesting. So at Prosper, we were invited to kick off a summit a couple weeks ago for a group called Women in Sports and Events. And it's an amazing group of professional women in mostly professional sport and events. So a couple weeks ago, one of our other business partners and I were in New York kicking off a summit for an amazing organization called WISE, Women in Sports and Events. And what was really interesting is there was a little bit of a younger
Yes.
component to the crowd. And I had a woman come up to me that was probably in her early to mid 30s. And she said, this is really fascinating. She goes, nobody talked about preparing for this. And she's like, so I hear a lot about perimenopause and menopause, and you need to lift heavy weights and change all of these things. But what should I be doing now
Yeah.
so that I don't have to make these drastic changes? She's like, I would love for you to talk to me and my friends, because she's like, we're still having kids and we're thinking about having kids. And so, like, changing these ideas is not really even in our game plan or on our horizon. And so it was really interesting to think about how we even share this information and back it up a little
Yeah.
bit to say, gosh, if you can get in the habit of like starting to lift weights and jump a little more before it hurts to jump, and
Yeah.
doing
Oh, yeah.
all of these things to build up that reserve, um, it'd be awesome.
Yeah, that I think that was one of the most powerful visuals that we digested, when we were kinda coming into this longevity information fire hose was that everything you do before the age of 30 is your principle, right? So you're building that principle, and then the rest of it's all about increasing your interest rate on that principle, right? That's the fundamental concept here is you can't go back and rebuild that principal. You can try to jack your interest rate on it over as we get older, but before 30 you can. You can build a much bigger base.
Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, and I think that, that's just such a good component. And I know, my mom grew up and she was active. Like she went to the gym, but she sat there with her 5 and 8 pound
Totally.
weights and we didn't know any better,
Yeah.
And so, but the her loss of muscle mass and mobility, even before she had significant health decline, was just
Yeah.
incredible, And so I agree that it's often a good wake up call for us to say, please continue to take care. We have to
Yeah.
continue to take care of ourselves.
Yeah. And this is kind of a random one, and maybe it's our bonus number 9, but one of the things that struck me when I was talking with my mom, she's 83, so this is not a shock, but it's different than the mom I remember when I was, she was 60, right? So right
Mhm.
now, wherever your parent is on the journey, one of the fun things can be to capture their stories on audio now as they're kind of
Mhm.
talking through things. And then when I was sitting there with my mom at 83, it's boring to sit in the hospital, right? It's super boring. And so nobody wants to have the news station blaring at you the full time. So we would just kind of lay around there and look at iPhone videos and play videos. And it would have been awesome to have had something in hand that was her 20 years prior. We just don't have
Mhm.
that on my iPhone. But I was thinking as we were sitting there with her, there's a lot of downtime in these caregiving
Yeah.
dynamics that you can make into some fun, some uplifting memory sharing or memory making that's not quite as doom and gloom as the rest of this topic is.
Absolutely. And I think capturing those stories is so valuable. I know each of my kids, I think in fourth or fifth grade, maybe even older than that, to interview a grandparent.
Yes, yeah, I remember that too
And
at our school.
I remember they did it in the living room of our house, and they were sitting in a part of our house, and I was kind of walking in and out. And there were stories that I never had heard.
Yeah,
And I was like, this is so, like, I don't know this. And like, I have a really small family. And so, like, my dad's the only one left. And
yeah.
so when he is gone, like these stories are disappearing. And it's interesting. And I'm so glad you brought that up. I was, again, in December, I was on vacation with my kids and my sister-in-law and my aunt joined us when I was so fortunate. And I also
Oh, yeah.
I think this is maybe number 10 is through these really hard times, new levels of relationships can form that we might have taken for granted for a little while. And that is another beautiful silver lining of having to be in these somewhat uncomfortable situations. And so I
Yeah,
have an aunt and uncle that are super, super dear to me. And I was really close to my uncle when I was little. He married my aunt. They had 2 kids who were, a good bit younger than I am. And life is busy. And so my brother and I are growing up. We went to college. They had their kids went to college, and we were always very friendly and always excited to see each other. But it just didn't happen very often. And when my mom declined, it became this really big priority for us all to be together, and that has translated into the last like 2.5 years of reconnecting with them, actually as an adult.
yeah,
And like she's a huge fan of what we do. She's the first person to sign up. And and they're amazing. But like even the story, so I was talking to her in December and she was like, gosh, we need to sit down with my uncle. And she's like, he remembers all of this. We just need to like record it and get it
yeah,
all, you know, stored
exactly.
exactly how you're saying and documented. But there are some really beautiful relationships that can come out of this that maybe haven't had the prioritization in life just because we're busy. So I think that is kind of like that is something I absolutely cherish coming out of the stress and the sadness of losing my mom is I have this beautiful new relationship with my aunt and uncle and my kids do
Yeah,
that we didn't have before.
yeah, it is a great silver lining.
Okay, well,
Okay.
we thought we were going to be really dialed on these 8 things. We went to 10 and got a little tangential. So let's just do too long, didn't listen,
Yes.
run through our list. Hit
Okay.
it. You have it in front of you. I don't.
Yeah.
So
So I'll be the cheat sheet. Okay. It's not that my memory
yeah,
ain't good. I
love
just
it.
the cheat sheet. Okay. So number one, get your documents in order. And that's everything from what people are hoping and wishing for how they're cared for, and when the moment of passing occurs, what they're hoping and wishing for. And that's also the nuts and bolts of like prescriptions, financials, bank accounts, just have that stuff in order. and before you need it to be an emergency thing. Secondly was the communication. Have the communication path back and forth with family on how these things are going to get shared so that nobody's surprised when we're in an emergency condition. Third thing was understanding that the health consequences of whatever event has triggered this moment in your parents' life will be broader and not directly related to the actual event that was the catalyst, which will feel different than things, midlife and with your children. Fourth was being aware of the financial considerations, the consequences of this event. And so understanding insurance before you have an event and potentially expanding that insurance before you're not able to access it because of the state of health that your parent is in. Fifth one was trying to get ahead of what's going to happen next, meaning there's going to be an event and then there's going to be a lot of rehabilitation related to it. 9 times out of 10, that rehabilitation is going to be more than what you expected, what your parent expects, and what insurance is covering. So understanding how to start that appeal process early ensures your parent gets the right level of care. 6 was being an advocate and making sure that you realize that's your role, and it's just your role to be noisy and irritating and squeaky, not rude, always kind, but you're going to be a squeaky wheel, and that's just expected. And because all of this is hard to do, self-care, super important. That's 7. And self-care, including taking your community up on all of the offers for health. 8 was remembering why we're doing what we're doing at midlife so that our bones and our muscles and our cognition carry us through to this phase of life with more health span and joy. Number 9 was the idea of taking the moment before there is a moment to record some stories, to be able to listen to and share when you have a lot of downtime sitting around helping your parent recover, or sharing it remotely if you're not able to be there with them. Ways to bring them joy that are outside of just sitting around and hearing the news, because that's what is happening in every single one of these hospital rooms, which is super depressing no matter which news station you listen to. And then number 10, your silver lining. You should sum us up.
So some beautiful connections can form out of some tragic or sad situations. And so don't let sadness rule. If there is an opportunity to connect with a family member or a friend or reestablish a relationship that may have been just kind of overlooked for a little while because of timing in life. So
yes,
there are some magic moments to connect with people again.
Yes. So we knew this was a heavier one, but we put it out there in the spirit of trying to share lessons learned so that when this moment in time comes, it might be a little bit easier.
Yes. And please, we would love to hear from you. Subscribe, send us comments, reach out to us, join our community, because it takes all of us to get through these times. So we'd love to hear from you, hear your stories. Right. Take care, everybody. Thanks for listening in.
Thanks for being with us.
Thank you so much for spending your time with us here today. If you liked what you heard and you got some tips on how to live better right now and for the long haul, please help us reach more midlife women. Please share and rate and like this show, and we can't wait to continue the dialogue with you on our next episode. Until then, thank you. It's time.